The engagement ring slipped from Emma's trembling fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor of the apartment she thought she knew. But this wasn't her apartment, not anymore. The photographs lining the mantelpiece showed her face, her smile, her life, but the woman in the images wore different clothes, stood in unfamiliar places, embraced people she'd never met. Her reflection stared back from the mirror across the room, but even that felt foreign now, like looking at a stranger wearing her skin. "You're finally awake," came a voice from behind her, soft, familiar, yet carrying an undertone that made her blood run cold. Emma turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man standing in the doorway looked exactly like David, her fiancé of 3 years. Same dark hair, same gentle eyes, same crooked smile that had once made her feel safe. But something was wrong. Everything was wrong. "David," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What's happening to me?" His smile widened, but it never reached his eyes. "The real question, Emma, is what's happening to us?" Emma's mind reeled as she tried to piece together the fragments of her memory. 3 days ago, she'd been planning their wedding, choosing flowers, tasting cakes, living in blissful anticipation. Now she stood in what should have been their shared apartment, but nothing felt familiar. The furniture was wrong, expensive pieces she'd never seen before. The walls were painted a deep burgundy instead of the soft blue she remembered. Even the scent in the air was different, heavy with an unfamiliar perfume that made her stomach turn. "I don't understand," she managed, backing away from the man who claimed to be David. "This isn't our home. These aren't our things." Her voice cracked as desperation crept in. "Please, I just want to go home." David, or whoever he was, moved closer, his movements deliberate and predatory. "But Emma, you are home. You've always been home. The question isn't where you are, but when you are." He reached toward her, and she noticed his hands were different, softer, unmarked by the small scar David had gotten from fixing their broken window last spring. The psychological thriller began to unfold as Emma's fragmented memories started bleeding together like watercolors in rain. She remembered David proposing, but now she also remembered him proposing differently, in a different place, with different words, wearing a different expression. The twisted story of her reality became clearer and more terrifying with each passing moment. Had there been 2 proposals? 2 Davids? Or was her mind finally unraveling after years of carefully constructed lies? "You're not David," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "David has a scar on his left hand. David's eyes have gold flecks. David would never look at me like that." The man before her tilted his head, studying her with clinical interest, as if she were a specimen under a microscope. "Interesting," he murmured, pulling out a small leather notebook and scribbling something down. "Subject shows signs of memory bleeding. The barriers are breaking down faster than anticipated." He looked up at her with those wrong eyes, and Emma realized with growing horror that she was part of some dark secret, some mind-bending story that she couldn't yet comprehend. Emma's world shifted again as the unreliable narrator of her own memory betrayed her. She remembered working at the marketing firm downtown, but now she also remembered being a teacher, a nurse, a writer, all with equal clarity and conviction. Each memory felt authentic, lived in, real. But they couldn't all be true. The plot twist wasn't just that David wasn't David, it was that Emma might not be Emma either. "Who am I?" she asked, her voice hollow and distant. The question echoed in the strange apartment, bouncing off walls that seemed to pulse with their own malevolent life. She caught sight of herself in the mirror again, but this time she noticed something that made her blood freeze. Her reflection was smiling while her face remained expressionless. Her reflection moved independently, raising its hand in a small, mocking wave. The man claiming to be David followed her gaze and chuckled softly. "You're beginning to see the cracks, aren't you? The places where the story doesn't quite fit together?" He moved to stand beside her, both of them staring at the impossible reflection. "Emma, meet Emma. Emma, meet Emma. You've been wanting to meet for so long." The mystery unraveled further as Emma confronted the impossible truth staring back at her from the mirror. Her reflection had always been there, but now it was separate, autonomous, living its own twisted story parallel to hers. The psychological thriller of her existence became clear. She wasn't losing her mind, she was discovering that she'd never had complete control of it to begin with. "The accident," she whispered, fragments of a buried memory surfacing like debris after a storm. "There was an accident 3 years ago. I was driving, and there was another car." Her voice trailed off as the full horror of her situation crystallized. The other car had contained another version of herself, another Emma with different memories, different experiences, different choices. The man watched her with scientific fascination as she pieced together the dark secrets of her fractured psyche. "The merger wasn't perfect," he explained, his voice taking on the tone of a researcher discussing a failed experiment. "Sometimes the subjects retain awareness of their other selves. Sometimes they remember being multiple people." He smiled that wrong smile again. "Sometimes they remember being in love with different versions of the same person." Emma's heart raced as she realized the true scope of the mind-bending story she'd been living. David, the real David, had died in that accident 3 years ago. The man before her was something else entirely, something that had taken David's place in her fractured reality. He was the researcher, the observer, the one conducting this twisted experiment on her splintered consciousness. "You're not David," she said with growing certainty. "You're the one who's been watching me, studying me, keeping me trapped in this psychological prison." The apartment around them began to shift and blur, revealing its true nature as a carefully constructed stage set. The expensive furniture flickered between different styles and periods, the walls breathed with an organic rhythm, and the photographs on the mantelpiece showed hundreds of different Emmas living hundreds of different lives. "Very good," the man said, applauding slowly. "You're finally seeing the truth. I am Dr. Marcus Webb, and you, Emma, are my greatest success and my most spectacular failure." His form began to change, revealing an older man with cold, calculating eyes. "You see, love isn't just an emotion, it's a survival mechanism. And I've been testing just how far that mechanism can be pushed before it breaks." The psychological thriller reached its crescendo as Emma understood the full horror of her situation. She wasn't just a victim of some twisted love story, she was a participant in a psychological experiment that had been running for years. Every memory, every emotion, every moment of joy and terror had been carefully orchestrated to test the limits of human consciousness under extreme duress. "The different versions of David, the different versions of me, they're all part of your experiment," she said, her voice gaining strength as understanding dawned. "You've been fragmenting my mind, creating multiple personalities, multiple realities, all to see what happens when love becomes a game of survival." The room around them continued to shift, revealing monitoring equipment, cameras, and observation windows that had been hidden behind the facade of normalcy. Dr. Webb nodded approvingly. "Love is the most powerful force in the human psyche. It can drive people to extraordinary acts of sacrifice, creativity, and resilience. But it can also be weaponized, twisted, used to manipulate and control." He gestured to the monitors displaying her vital signs, brain activity, and psychological profiles. "You've been in love with different versions of the same person across multiple constructed realities." The question was, how many times could your heart break before it stopped believing in love altogether? Emma felt the weight of the dark secret crushing down on her as she realized the true scope of her imprisonment. Every relationship, every moment of happiness, every heartbreak had been artificial, designed to push her psyche to its breaking point. But as the twisted story of her captivity became clear, something else emerged, a core of strength she hadn't known existed. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Love isn't just about survival. It's about choice. And I choose to fight." The mirrors in the room began to crack, reflecting not just her image but all the versions of herself she'd been forced to live. Each reflection showed a different Emma, the teacher, the nurse, the writer, the bride-to-be, but all of them shared the same determined expression. Dr. Webb's confident facade began to crack as his carefully constructed experiment started to unravel. "Impossible," he muttered, frantically adjusting controls on his equipment. "The psychological barriers should be holding. The love attachment should be keeping you compliant." But Emma was no longer the broken, confused woman who had awakened in the wrong apartment. She was something new, something he hadn't planned for, a unified consciousness born from the fragments of her shattered psyche. The plot twist that Dr. Webb hadn't anticipated was that love, even artificial love, even manipulated love, could create something stronger than the sum of its parts. Emma's various personalities began to merge, not into the fractured, controllable being he designed, but into something more powerful and coherent than she'd ever been before. The psychological thriller of her captivity was transforming into something else entirely, a story of liberation through self-acceptance. "You created me," Emma said, her voice now carrying the wisdom and strength of all her various selves. "But you didn't create love. You can't manufacture it, control it, or destroy it. Love isn't a game of survival, it's the reason we survive." The equipment around them began to spark and malfunction as her unified consciousness rejected the artificial constraints of the experiment. Dr. Webb backed away, his experiment collapsing around him. "This isn't possible. The human mind can't integrate multiple personalities without severe psychological damage. You should be catatonic, not this." But Emma was walking toward the exit, her reflection in the mirrors now showing a single, unified image, herself, complete and whole for the first time in years. The mystery unraveled completely as Emma reached the door of her psychological prison. Behind her, Dr. Webb screamed about years of research, about the importance of understanding the human psyche, about the greater good his experiments would serve. But his words fell on deaf ears. Emma had learned the most important lesson of all, that love, real love, begins with loving yourself enough to recognize when you're being manipulated. The door opened not onto another constructed reality, but onto a hospital corridor. Emma realized she was wearing a hospital gown, not the elegant dress she thought she was wearing. The apartment, the mirrors, even Dr. Webb himself, all of it had been happening inside her mind as she recovered from the accident that had nearly killed her 3 years ago. The real David was waiting for her in the hallway, older, worried, but undeniably real. "Emma," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "You've been in a coma for 3 years. But the doctors said you were showing signs of consciousness, that you were fighting to come back." She looked at his hands and saw the familiar scar, looked into his eyes and found the gold flecks she remembered. This was real. This was home. This was love without manipulation, without games, without the twisted story of survival, just love, pure and simple. Emma's journey from the fragments of her shattered psyche to the wholeness of self-acceptance leaves us with haunting questions about the nature of reality, love, and the human mind's incredible capacity for both destruction and healing. Was her experience in the psychological prison real, or was it her mind's way of processing trauma? Did Dr. Webb exist, or was he a manifestation of her own self-doubt and fear? The twisted story of her captivity might have been the only way her consciousness could make sense of 3 years of darkness. What do you think really happened to Emma? Was she truly the victim of a mind-bending psychological experiment, or was her fractured reality a protective mechanism created by her own traumatized mind? Share your theories in the comments below. Did the dark secrets of her imprisonment reveal something deeper about how we process love and loss? If this psychological thriller left you haunted and curious about the mysteries of the human mind, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that explore the twisted corridors of consciousness. Remember, the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones hiding in the shadows, they're the ones we create in our own minds when love becomes a game of survival. Until next time, stay kind, stay sharp, and stay curious.